Hello everybody, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of Video Clips. And just a quick couple of announcements. One is that we have a second book coming out. I'm writing with a great colleague of mine by the name of Ken Solobacki, and it's going to be Stories of COVID. And we're going to feature the horrible things that have happened to people. I think they need to be collected into one volume. And it's some of the stuff that I report every week. But I think the collection of stories makes an impact. Some of the lockdown nonsense, which we're going to talk about today, and then also the heroes of COVID, the sheriffs who said we're not doing it, the people who stood up and stand up people who resisted. So if you'd like for your story to be included in the book, Pam Popper at msn.com. One other thing I'll mention is our support groups for anxiety and depression, and our support group for COVID specifically, because some people, their issues really are more related to COVID: loss of job, loss of friends, isolation, disconnection from elderly parents, and that sort of thing. So anyway, let's get started with some COVID nonsense. That's the title for today. And I'm going to start with a quote from Hermann Goering, who is one of Hitler's main people, his propaganda minister. He says, "Why, of course the people don't want war. Why should some poor slob on the farm want to risk his life in a war when the best he can get out of it is to come back to his farm in one piece? Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia nor in England, or for that matter in Germany. That is understood, but after all, it is the leaders of a country who determine the policy, and it is always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it's a democracy or fascist dictatorship, or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked, denounce the peacemakers for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. And boy, it works the same today. I've often said that Hermann Goering and Rudolf Hess and Adolf Hitler are smiling from the grave at the Emperor of California and the Empress of Oregon and some of these people, and thinking, gosh, I never would have thought of anything like that, right? Okay, so this was at a Texas Alliance hospital in Fort Worth. The message is try not to explode, knowing how I feel about these things. Danielle and I just had baby number 4 and our first here in Texas. After 15 hours of labor, a nurse came in and told us that Danielle must have a COVID test. We respectfully declined, stating there was zero reason to do so since we had been quarantined. The nurse said, "That's your right," and then left. Less than 5 minutes later, another nurse came in and said, "I just want to inform you that if you decline this test, you will be placed on what she called the federal investigation list." She then told us we would all be considered positive. Me and family and baby would not be able to leave with us, taking the baby away. Now keep in mind, we're in the heat of labor, few labor complications going on, and now in the middle of this, they come in and make this announcement: your baby will not be able to leave the hospital with you. Kidnapping my unborn son in that moment to get a test, which if we decide to decline, we will now be treated as if we're all infected and counted as positive COVID tests. She also stated that with contact tracing, everyone we had contact with will be notified and must get tested and prove a negative test, or they will also be considered positive. Just even retelling this story, I'm about to explode. This is all BS and I'm so sick of it. And yes, that's exactly what's going on. Babies being taken away from their mothers, because after all, the bonding with the mothers and the breastfeeding, I mean, who would think that's important? I mean, you understand why I get angry sometimes, right? Okay, your story about the Nazi trains hit me hard. Make Americans Free Again should find a way to fight the bureaucracy to get families together with their dying loved ones, or at least send people to help them. We need doctors, nurses, lawyers, social workers, etc. to advocate for these people. This is becoming America's next great Holocaust. Okay, according to the Texas Emergency Management Division, people should wear their masks even when they're at home. I suppose I live with a cat, and I guess if I wore a mask, I could keep myself from getting COVID from myself. I mean, what is up with that? And then one of the officials said, remember when we had to put out the click it or ticket in order to get people to wear seatbelts? Now we should look at mask it or casket, he said. 4 months ago in March, a critic said, we were told to shelter in place for a couple weeks, 15 days to slow the spread of COVID. Now it's July and government officials are telling American citizens to stay home and wear a mask over a virus with a 99% plus survival rate. You might remember I read you the story of a woman in I think it's South Carolina, North or South Carolina, can't remember which, but anyway, who had broken ribs and was treated horribly at the medical center when she went for treatment. And she said, I thank you so much for reading my story on Wednesday's broadcast. I actually have a positive update to offer, which might add some hope to this otherwise depressing narrative. I submitted a detailed complaint to Tidelands Health, who operates the 2 large community hospitals in our county of Georgetown, South Carolina, which is south of Myrtle Beach. I told them that I had contacted other sources with my story and suggested several changes that could be implemented at the entrance to improve patient reception and courtesy. The complaint was reviewed by the patient liaison and several other departments, and she got back an email with not 1 but 2 apologies and a bullet point list of all the steps that have been implemented. The liaison appreciated my feedback on the emergency reception and assured me that the behaviors were not acceptable and that corrective actions had been taken with the guard. So the woman points out that we have to speak up about this, and while so many of the times it falls on deaf ears, particularly if you're caught talking to public health authorities or to the emperors and empresses and their assistants, there are some people in healthcare who still do care, and they don't like what's going on any better than we do, and it's worth it to say something, and you may change it for the next poor person who shows up and would have been treated badly, but had you not said something. So anyway, she says, I'm probably the 1 person in 100 willing to raise hell when I see abuse, and so we all should be the 1 in 100 who would do that. But then she goes on to make some comments about perception and public perception and the criminal manipulation of data. She says, ironically, the day you read my story Wednesday, the CEO of this very hospital where I had my visit was given a soundbite on the national evening news about shortages of nurses. This happened again on Thursday with doctors. The message from the news anchor was that our cases were spiking. We are now the USA hotspot and the world was coming to an end. They claimed there were suddenly 50 new cases between 2 hospitals. Now, these are cases, people. Can you imagine if every year they got on television every day and said, we have 600 new cases of a cold? It doesn't matter the cases. It matters the death rate, the morbidity rate. Well, anyway, they claimed there were suddenly about 50 new cases between the 2 hospitals, and they would have to call in the medical reserves of the National Guard. For 50 people, you definitely need the medical reserves of the National Guard. There were also numerous reports that several other states are blaming Myrtle Beach for visitors catching COVID there. Last week, the hotel bookings dropped 20%. I thought, why is our county in South Carolina being targeted on the national news twice in 1 week? What's going on? So I did some research. And by the way, when people actually do take the time to start digging into the data, they call the hospitals in their local area, and then they check the county data and the state data. They really start to figure out what I'm talking about, and they see it firsthand. So if you're a skeptic watching this, do take the time to look into it. You'll be shocked at what you find. So anyway, here is what this woman found. In Georgetown County since March, the total confirmed cases are 724, which represents 1.4% of the entire state. Total COVID deaths during that period in a population of 63,000, which doesn't include the seasonal visitors, is, wait for it, 0.001%. Greater Myrtle Beach had 5,377 cases and 67 deaths in a population of 355,000 for a rate of 0.0002%. So we are obviously very low risk. And so, and given that the death rate is often inflated, the risk could be even lower. But you can see the data have nothing to do with what the actions that are being taken are. It's that way here, it's that way everywhere. Okay, so she finishes with, my opinion is this is all political. You think? I think it is too. All right, masks are now mandatory in all indoor public spaces in most cities and major cities in Ontario. I refuse to wear a mask, this woman says, and simply state that I can't wear one for medical reasons. I do suffer with severe migraines at times, and I'm susceptible to humidity, and we're currently going through a heat wave in Toronto, so I'm not willing to wear a mask and risk getting a migraine. But I'm also against wearing masks and feel that they do more harm than good by restricting oxygen intake, etc. Most stores accept my statement that I can't wear a mask for medical reasons and welcome me inside their store. And so far, I haven't been accosted by customers, but it's always at the back of my mind that there's a high possibility of this happening. And I do get a lot of emails from people who've been harmed, physically harmed. And there was a shooting incident and a death in Michigan over mask wearing. So that's great public policy. Do something that turns people against one another. Again, Hitler smiling from the grave at this kind of thing. It's the playbook, right? So anyway, Longo's, a grocery retailer, refused my entry. Every customer was forced to stand outside in a lineup and read a sign regarding COVID-19 symptoms before entering. Then the door Nazi, like the soup Nazi on Seinfeld, informed me that I had to put on a mask. When I told her that I couldn't wear a mask for medical reasons, she curtly told me that I'd either have to get a face shield or get someone to do my shopping for me. I left that day because I was just busy, and I will not go to that store again. They don't deserve my business. Then this person describes the rest of her shopping experience. I went to the Bay, big department retailer, on the first day they reopened in May after being closed for 3 months. I had a lot of merchandise to return because they just closed a few days after I placed a large online order. I refused to pay my Bay credit card bill for 3 months as I knew I was returning most of the items. I had to call the credit department 3 times, long holds each time, to discuss this with him and to get the interest charges reversed each month. Such a waste of time. The day I did the refunds, I decided to do some shopping as I hadn't been in a clothing store for 3 months. After browsing through the store for about an hour and selecting a dozen items to try on, I went to the closest fitting room and it was closed. I went to the employee who was stationed at the door welcoming everybody back to the Bay and asked her which fitting room was open. She informed me that no fitting rooms were open due to COVID-19. Fitting rooms are very dangerous places. The virus hangs out there. When I asked her how I'm supposed to try on the clothes, she informed me that I could purchase all of them, take them home to try on, and then return the items I didn't want, which could potentially be all of them. How does this make any logical sense at all? I also told her that I should have been informed when I first entered the store that the fitting rooms were closed. I would have not have wasted an hour of my valuable time. This past Saturday, I was in another Bay store and I asked if the fitting room was open. They had one fitting room open in this massive 3-level department store. Of course, there was a lineup at the fitting room, strictly controlled by a door Nazi. When I finally got to the front of the line, I realized they had every second fitting room closed, so they were only operating with one fitting room at half capacity. I had to laugh out loud because there were 9-foot walls between each fitting room with only a 2 to 3 inch gap at the top. So I said to the door Nazi, "This is ridiculous. So how does the virus now penetrate through walls? And that's why you have to leave every second fitting room open." The door Nazi just shrugged her shoulders. She knew I was right. Again, it was too late in the day to ask to speak to the store manager, but I'll follow up this week. So speaking of Canada, according to Canada's Federal Minister of Health, Patty Hadju, Canadians must obey orders to self-isolate. Travelers returning to the country have to stay at home for at least 2 weeks, and if they violate the order, they can be fined up to $1 million and face 3 years in prison. That seems about right. I mean, oh my gosh. My daughter called today from Las Cruces, New Mexico. She's the wife of a military officer stationed in Las Cruces. She was having lunch today at a small restaurant that has an outdoor patio. There were a total of 3 patrons on the patio, my daughter and 2 older single men. Each was seated well beyond 6 feet at 3 different tables. Suddenly, 2 men appeared in street clothing, but with black armband that said COVID Police. They found the owner and announced to him that the ventilation on the patio was not sufficient and he was to close. The owner then called 911 and asked for state police. Upon arrival, the police announced that the restaurant did not have to close, provoking an argument with the COVID gangster who claimed they were of higher authority. The customers were then herded out while 2 police forces continued to argue. Needless to say, my daughter, the wife of a career officer, and the 2 men, both veterans, were somewhat shell-shocked. When she called, her voice was trembling over disbelief. "Welcome to the new America. Papers, please." Yes, just like the Nazis. I carry my health orders around that specifically state that there's an exemption for the mask and the whole 9 yards. And when I've been questioned about it, I say, well, I'm sure soon we're going to have armbands. So you need to put something out if we need to wear armbands or some other type of identification that you want to see in order to come into the store and buy bananas. I mean, think about this. We now have COVID police. We have a self-appointed police force that has no authority. And you have to call, currently there's a police force, although there are those that they think we should just defund all the police, and then I guess we could just let the COVID police take over, and they can just walk by and decide that the ventilation isn't right in your building and you have to close, and then there would be nobody to call to overturn and what those Nazis wanted to do to you. That's in New Mexico. And by the way, the Empress of New Mexico is the one I spoke about who had a jewelry store open up to get her jewelry when everything was closed down. And she said because there was no contact, it was okay. Well, you know, when you're the Empress, you have to look great. You know, I totally understand that, right? And then, this is hysterical. My husband was in line at Dunkin' Donuts drive-thru, was refused service because he didn't have a mask on. So in order to drive through and get something, you have to be wearing a mask. This is ludicrous. Ludicrous. All right, so on to what's happening here. I live in Johnson County, Missouri. Our governor is Parsons. He's come out and said that masks are a personal choice, but our county has decided to mandate masks at the end of the month. There's supposed to be a medical exemption, which I fall into. I both lip read and have severe lung damage due to medical malpractice. My mom is asthmatic and shouldn't be wearing one, and my husband has military disability for his lungs, so I'm sure it looks odd when we go into stores without one or should try to go in. The stores here are not allowing us in. They're physically removing at us or yelling at us to get out of their stores when we try. The worst offenders are Aldi and Walmart. So we've been traveling to the next county an hour away to shop. When I tell them I lip read, I get laughed at, so I feel there's no option but to spend my money elsewhere. We found out yesterday that because the county declared the mask mandate, they now get paid $35,000 per mandate. The hospital has a vending machine for masks now as well and refuses to let you in without one. They're refusing services to people who cannot wear a mask. Heaven forbid we have an actual emergency. The sheriff here says he will be arresting and fining people for $1,000 for not wearing a mask. We're told to comply or else. My basic rights of being able to feed my family has been taken away, and I'm not okay with this. I don't have the financial means to sue, as our businesses have been hit hard due to COVID. Please keep up the good work. I feel like you're the only sane one out there right now, and I'm trying to stay sane too. Can you imagine this? We're going to arrest people and charge them $1,000. And I mean, and of course, this person can't work, can't feed the family, can't go buy food. Great moments in public health. Boy, the Emperor of Missouri must be so proud right now hearing these kinds of stories. People starving, people out of work, people have to drive an hour to go someplace and buy food, people turning against one another. But remember what Hermann Göring said. All you have to do is tell people they're being attacked, denounce the peacemakers for lack of patriotism, exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country, and it works the same in any year. It's working now. That's what they're doing. They're turning people against each other, because if we can't unite and get together, we can't overcome them. But we're going to, because we are uniting and we're getting together. And protests are happening all over the country. You don't see this on television because the fake news isn't going to report it. But protests, big ones, are going on all over the country. Civil disobedience is going on all over the country. Lawsuits are being filed all over the country. And sooner or later, these despotic leaders are going to be out of a job. I'm looking forward to that day. I know you're looking forward to that day too. And there will be justice done for criminals who do this kind of thing to people. The people who despise humanity, like what I'm reporting to you here, their day will come. And we will wait for that day with some anxious anticipation, I might add. All right, my email address is pampopper@msn.com. Go to Make Americans Free Again, sign up, get your friends to sign up, and I'll be back to you tomorrow with more news.